Good morning, everyone. I will call the meeting of the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council to order at 8:35. We're up here in Fergus Falls area. Had a great tour yesterday. Glad to see you. First thing is to get a roll call on who is on the meeting. I'll turn it over to you. Need my mic. Okay.
Members, Purwell,
I'm here.
Purwell present, Sheriff.
He's here.
Sheriff present, Baird.
Present.
Baird present, Representative Burkle.
Burkle present.
Burkle present, Eggerling.
Present.
Eggerling present, Senator Kerr. Kaharski.
Kaharski present.
Kaharski present, Senator Lang. Palmer.
Present.
Palmer present, Saxhog.
Here.
Saxhog present, Suss.
Here.
Suss present, Representative Bang.
Present.
Representative Bang present. Mr. Chair, there are 10 members present.
Great. We have a quorum. Thank you all. First order of business is to review and approve the agenda.
I'll move. Such moves.
The agenda has been moved. Any discussion, changes? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Review and approve the minutes. They were in your packet. Any suggestions, changes? Motion for approval.
Such.
I have a motion for approval. There are two motions for approval. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Any conflicts of interest to report for today's agenda? My comments. We had a great tour yesterday. Thanks to all of our partners who made it possible. Thanks to all of you who spent the time. I thought it was really interesting to see the projects, see the complexes, see the partnerships. I know it's a lot of work, and I appreciate it. So thank you for everyone who made it possible. I've had a number of people ask me about the search process for the new executive director we'll bring on as Mark retires. I've been working with LCC. They will be at our July meeting to give much more detailed sort of process how this will work. Answer questions. It ultimately, we have a say in how we do this, and they will give us some options, I think, at our July meeting, and explain the process as they laid out. So hang on, that will be coming. Happy to answer any questions at this point, but they've laid out a process that will get us to hiring someone in December, so there's an overlap with Mark, and a good transition.
Has there been a job announcement released yet? Or?
No, we're way before that. We're going to map out the process so that we figure out the job description, how we advertise it, the length of time. It will all be, nothing's happened and nothing will happen until we decide
All right.
or give our blessing to the process. I have no other comments. Mark?
Mr. Chair, members, thank you. Again, I want to reiterate some of David's words yesterday. The tour was fantastic. So thanks to the groups, everybody, the agencies that were all involved in that. Very, very well done. And sincere thanks. It's a wonderful day. I also want to sincerely thank all the new council members who are here now, who were able to make it, and the ones who were here yesterday, who were able to make yesterday. it's really important out there for you all to see what's going on in the health thing. I think after yesterday, we kind of try to understand that a little bit more. There's a whole different dynamic to looking at it on paper, to seeing what happens in the field, and how tough things are to happen, but how wonderful to. So I really want to thank you for that. I think this was probably in the nearly 11 years I've been here, I think this was the best attended tour by council that we had. So thank you very much. And I know the other two report here wish they had them, so I really appreciate it. Other thing I wanted to mention is a gentleman sitting up into the right in the corner, Julius is here. He is an IT specialist with LCC, Legislative Coordinating Commission. So we thank him for coming up. He came up just to make sure because this is an odd situation, an odd meeting, we wanted to help make sure that IT was good. And we've already put his talents to work this morning. Tom's really. Thank you, Julius, very much for being here. I think that's pretty much it, Mr. Chair. I had a great time with you. I'm looking forward to today's meeting and thank you all members.
Great.
Well, I'm sorry, there was one more thing. Tom just reminded me that I gave him the duty to give a report to you. Every year we do the call for funding requests, and then the requests come in after that, and you get a chance today to be talking about them sooner or later. I wanted to make sure that for the record, for you, but also for the public, that there was kind of a statement of what happens with that call for funding request. What's the process? How do we get it out? How do we tell people about it? So Thomas put together a little presentation for that, and I'd like to share that with you, Don. Thank you, Tom.
Members over Zoom, can you hear me okay from down here?
Like Sandy, Matt, John, can you hear?
Can anybody hear me from down here?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, great. Mr. Chair, members, this presentation is just to give you, as Mark said, a basic informational overview of the call for funding request process and the press release process that we went through to try and make sure that the call for funding request gets into the hand of as many groups and organizations that would be eligible for funding as possible. So a basic overview of the process: we distribute a press release. We then receive news coverage from local and national media outlets, and then we receive proposals. So this is a basic overview of the groups that we distributed the press release to. So within the legislature, we sent a letter to each member of the House and each member of the Senate. In addition to the members of the legislature, we also included their staff and committee staff as well. The hope being that they would distribute the call for funding request to organizations within their district if they have any municipalities, county governments, watersheds, or local organizations that could be eligible for funding, as well as to include it in their legislative updates. Within other units of government, we send out notices to all counties, with which that comes from the Association of Minnesota Counties, as well as all cities from the League of Minnesota Cities. We included this year each tribe within Minnesota, so that primarily would be their natural resource contacts, as well as watershed districts. So this year we also included lake associations, as well as the state and local news media. So one potential challenge with that is maintaining our own internal list of state and local news media, which for smaller papers, smaller publications, they change, staff changes, or they are absorbed, or they go under. So that's one challenge through this process, is just maintaining an accurate list that'll actually get to a human being on the other side.
How are NGOs included?
So NGOs are not primarily sent out to. I think the process for NGOs being, we send out to our own subscriber list. So that's about 600-700 folks that have subscribed to our updates. So that would be our primary way of contacting NGOs, though there's certainly room for making a list there as well, I would say.
But they're getting the call.
Yeah, seemingly, based on at least the number of proposals, I would say so.
Just that.
Yeah. So basic timeline, we released the call on April 1st. That same day we send out a press release. So that is sent out via a third-party company that distributes to Associated Press affiliate outlets. So those are folks that run Associated press releases. So that same day, we distribute to our own internal media list as well as our internal subscriber list. So that's about, as I mentioned, about 700 people on the subscriber list, plus another 300 to 400 media contacts. So then between the 1st and the 9th, we saw a bunch of news articles being released talking about the call for funding. By May 5th, we sent out an additional press release noting that the deadline is approaching. So trying to get any organizations that may have heard about the call for funding request in the first place to know that there is a deadline and it's coming up. So if you're submitting a proposal, get on that. And then we got additional news coverage noting that the deadline was approaching for the May 23rd deadline. So then between April and May, as we send out our weekly legislative updates, which cover basic happenings at the Capitol, Outdoor Heritage Fund, bill-related news, and the legislative process, we links and updates for the call for funding request. So same thing as the deadline approached, we put a link in there noting that the deadline is approaching. So this is a basic breakdown of the press coverage that we got. So a majority is these Associated Press affiliates. So that's not necessarily Minnesota-based outlets. So that's an additional challenge is when you distribute by third-party media companies, you don't always get, you can encourage them to focus on Minnesota and adjacent states, but you're always going to get some coverage from outside of the state, which, certainly isn't a bad thing, but obviously we want applicants from within Minnesota. And then 23% would be local news. So a few examples on the right, we've got Cook County News Herald, Red Lake Nation News, we've got Grand Forks Herald and Outdoor News, in addition to several other outlets. Then 7% came from legislative updates. So that's from individual members of the House and Senate. So results wise, we saw web traffic increase to our website beyond the historical average. And then we see, so that chart there is comparing between April and May, as well as the last week of the call for funding request deadline. So we see additional traffic to our homepage and other LSOHC pages, as well as the call for funding page itself. We got about 30 news articles that covered the call for funding request. And this year, a record number, 58 proposals altogether. So between ML 22 and 25, we had about 52 and a half on average proposals. So this year we broke the record and made 58. So this presentation is just to give you all an overview of the process and to invite any feedback or ideas if you have it. Obviously, our goal is to get the information out there as best we can and encourage all the potential applicants to apply. So thank you very much.
Daryl?
Couple of questions. One, can people submit requests outside of this time frame, but it just doesn't look at until a specific time?
That's a good question. So our site doesn't open for them to start a proposal until April 1st.
Okay,
So we did-
portal based.
Right, yeah, so it's all within the website. Though I will say we communicated outside of that time period with a few organizations who had questions about the process. So certainly anybody could contact us and we can get them set up ahead of time with some basic expectations of what to expect.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other question?
One comment, and that is that there's an area that can't really figure out how much exposure we got on it, but we know we have exposure. Now it's through social media. That the entity that we use to send out other press releases and to get it saturated through the market, so to speak. They do send out their own social media sites too. Yeah. But there's no way we can really grasp that for these results, these data results at the time.
I, just as an observation, I chair the Brainerd Airport Commission, and we have a company called Stratelligent that actually has the ability to go and monitor that social media and the traffic and number of clicks on our website or where they came from as we think about airport, airlines coming in and out. So if you're trying to get more data information on that, we can talk about that off to the side if you're interested.
And I would just say, Ron asked a question on the side, CPL has its own mailing list to go out with hundreds of groups for the smaller funding requests that isn't part of what we're talking.
Mr. Chairman, just to comment, and Sandy might know this as well. Tom, this is what our business does every day. So if you want to pick the brains of folks who do this kind of thing all the time in terms of tracking tracking media coverage, tracking social media and web traffic. Happy to put you in touch with one of our folks just to have a coffee.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Great.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, and I would just add that, I've been, even in the legislature, we were pushing our communication staff to kind of work with ethnic media. So I can have my staff share
Yeah,
our list of ethnic.
yeah,
media
that'd be
that
great.
you
I
guys
appreciate
can
it.
Go out with.
Great.
All kinds of new resources.
Yes.
Any other comments? If not, we'll move on to, presentation discussion of the Prairie Habitat Complex building. What's going on here, Mark? I'll turn this over to you.
Mr. Chair, members, well, what it is to you, we're gonna have, Rick Folk, who is the Prairie Habitat Specialist, and we're making more to his title than that, I'm sure there probably is. But, he's gonna give us a presentation. This is, yesterday we saw the nuts and bolts on the land. This is to give a 40,000 foot view of what happens. So I'll give you a little broader perspective, a little different perspective of the whole thing. Tom, do you have a microphone? Rick, thank you as a microphone, Greg.
If you want to just
There you go.
swap the switch on, and then I'm just working on getting your PowerPoint loaded up.
Mr. Holt, nice to have you.
Just, okay. Yes, thank you for the invitation. So, yeah, what I'm going to try to do today, and then I'll be followed by some panelists, is yesterday we saw kind of the what. Today I want to kind of cover some of the why we do it, kind of some of the history and some of the science of what we're doing and why.
Load up just a second. Oh, there we go.
Okay, so yeah, just signs and logos. Those of you who have covered Minnesota, these are just some of the signs you see out there. Again, all heard me say, or many of you heard me say, when I talk to friends and colleagues in other states that have similar positions to mine, they just fall over backwards with everything that's going on in Minnesota. A lot of that relative to this group. So it can be a little confusing for some people out there, but it's really, really confusing. Just because we do have so many different partners doing so many different things out there. So here's another slide just showing some of the partnerships. This is a slide that Steve Chaplin and I have used in previous discussions relative to the Prairie Plan and formal presentations to this group. So one of the things I want to talk about is, and Anne Marie asked me to talk about this, who led the tour yesterday, is I'm going to try to talk about some really big picture stuff. But all that big picture stuff often starts with a cup of coffee or a cup of tea around somebody's kitchen table. So it starts out really small in those conversations, especially as it relates to acquisitions, easements. It's just some quiet conversations that occur out there. Partnerships between private landowners, the NGOs, the agencies, etc. Okay, so what guides us? So there are a number of different tools we have out there. Many of you have heard us talk about the Minnesota Prairie Plan. On this map, that's outlined in the dark areas, the core areas. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has their thunderstorm map, which is their prediction of breeding duck pairs. That's the colored behind there. So red is high density of breeding pairs, blues and greens, lower densities. And the arrow there shows where we were at yesterday. If you remember some of Sean and MLT's posters, they held up that fairly round shape right there around Lake Christina. Some of our other partners in the state, Audubon has their important bird areas. The Nature Conservancy has their priority conservation areas. Other groups have similar. I tried to put those all on the same slide and it got really ugly and confusing really quickly. So yeah, well, I just kind of showed a couple of the biggies on this map. Okay, so yesterday afternoon's tour. This map is less. There's a little less on here than some of the maps that Sean was handing out. I was having all sorts of GIS issues. Very briefly, the greens are federal. Dark green WPAs, light green are some of the easements. The oranges are state. Darker WMAs, lighter, kind of like peach, maybe prairie banks, blue MLT easements, red Nature Conservancy, yellow DU easements. I was not able to pull up the Bowser easements. We had some GIS hookups. GIS is transitioning to a new platform, and we were having some connection issues. Clustered or scattered. So if you were around in the conservation world back in the 70s and 80s, one of the big terms everybody is using was SLOS, single large or several small. So the idea is, do we cluster all of our conservation into one or a few big landscapes, or do we scatter our effort all over the place? And we are still having that debate today, and we haven't come up with anything. So this is more south central part of the state, just a little south of where we are today. Just to kind of show the two extremes in the state. The Lac-Qui-Parle WMA and Big Stone National Wildlife Refuge Complex. It's a big complex. You can go out there and, hey, this is what it looked like back in the 1700s. For most of the state, especially the prairie part of the state, prairie farmland, it's a patchwork quilt of WMAs, WPAs, easements, CRP, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the questions we, the conservation community, not just we, the DNR, have to wrestle with is, and I'll talk here specifically about acquisitions, although it also applies to enhancement and restoration, is how should we prioritize? Where should we prioritize? So there would be some people that would say that we should, if we've got two parcels that any one organization is looking at for acquisition, one of those parcels butts up against Lac-Qui-Parle WMA. That's the left arrow. That's what we should focus on. Somebody else might say, well, there's kind of a big empty spot out there in the middle of Swift or in southeast Swift County where we don't have any public land. So we should focus our efforts there and acquire that piece. In that case, everybody should have a WMA or a WPA within a 10-15 minute drive of where they live. There isn't a perfect world. We can't do everything everywhere. I can also, this slide also illustrates a couple things. Like if you look at Lac-Qui-Parle County, and again, the oranges are state, the greens are federal. Look at Lac-Qui-Parle, there's a lot of state land and a little federal land. Look up more in Polk County, there's a lot of federal land, a little state land. Big Stone County, a good mix. So again, we have a very diverse conservation landscape out there. Once you move into the north and northeastern part of the state, where we have those huge blocks of state forests, national forests, it's a different game. But I want to specifically talk here about kind of the prairie farmland part of the state. Where should we do conservation? So just another way to look at the last slide. Some people would argue that we should do a lot of our conservation near metro areas. That's where the people are. We want people to get out and use these. It's ultimately people who are paying for this work. So we should focus on, arbitrary here, Metro, St. Cloud, Mankato, some of our larger urban areas. Other people might say we should spend most of our time out in western Minnesota because that's where we have a lot of the existing habitat and we can build on that. Again, then we've got the scattered versus clustered, rural or metro buffer. We want to really point out there is no right and wrong answer. As again, I said, we've been debating this since the 70s. We don't have any answers yet. So there are no right or wrong answers. There is no clear yes, no's, but there are trade-offs. We always have limited funds, limited staff, limited effort. So we can't do everything everywhere. So these are a lot of the conversations that the conservation partners have out there on a daily basis, either in meetings or one-on-one phone conversations, just trying to kind of wrestle through some of these questions. Okay, talk about, so that was kind of focused on some of our acquisition ideas, and I'm trying to do, obviously cover a lot in 2 or 3 minutes. Once we get to especially our enhancement work, you guys know me, I always start with Leopold. So this is one of the first pages in Leopold's 1931 game management. The central thesis of game management is this: game can be restored by the creative use, and he italicized that, of the same tools which have heretofore destroyed it. the axe, the plow, the cow, the fire, and gun. Okay, so little bit of nerdy science here. Ecological enhancement is basically an ecological disturbance. We're trying to reset succession. Going back to 1978, one of the founding hypotheses of ecological science in the modern day is Connell's intermediate disturbance hypothesis. So if we look at this graph on here, the horizontal axis is the disturbance, how intense, how large, how frequent, and the vertical axis is diversity. And we can talk about plant diversity, animal diversity, etc. What this hypothesis says is kind of the sweet spot is in the middle. Let's talk about the plant community. If you have too much disturbance, basically only dandelions can survive. If you have too little disturbance in a prairie situation, big blue stem is so aggressive, it's just going to crowd everything out. So at very, very low disturbance, you've got 1 or 2 species, big blue stem and Canada goldenrod. At really, really high levels of diversity or disturbance, you've got dandelions and ragweed. So what we want to do is try to find that sweet spot where we're doing the right amount, the right frequency, and the right intensity of disturbance for management/enhancement. Okay, jumping back to acquisition for just a second. Again, to talk about landscape context, which I will tie back to enhancement here in a second. Not all acres are the same. So the dark green parcels are 2 parcels that the conservation community is looking at acquiring from some willing landowners. Well, obviously 160 acres is bigger than 60 acres, so we should buy the 160 acres. Okay, but in this cartoon, there's no habitat around 160 acres. Okay, the 60 acre, it abuts and connects a WMA and a WPA, making 2 smaller parcels, 1 large parcel. So in that case, the conservation community may actually want to focus on acquiring a smaller parcel of land that connects and makes large blocks versus an isolated but larger parcel. Okay. When we talk about both acquisition and management/enhancement, bigger is better, bigger is more diverse. So this is up in Clay and Becker County, a couple of my favorite WPAs from when I used to live up there. On the right, or on the left, is 1 subunit of Sagrotten WPA. It's 15 acres. It's basically a puddle with a fringe of grass around it. Okay. Every time I've driven by there in the spring and the fall, there are always ducks in there during the migratory season, low feeding and feeding. However, there's almost no nesting cover around it. There's a little fringe. It's probably gets pretty hard by the raccoons and the fox. On the right is Helixton WPA. If you guys have never been there, please get up there. It's all native prairie. You can see the wetland count. It's almost it's over 2 square miles, and there's some abutting land next to it. I have no idea how many different wetlands or how many different wetland types, sizes, depths. There's habitat for several species. The broods can move between multiple wetlands. What I'm going to present here in the next few slides is going to look fairly historical when you see some of the dates. My point is that we've known this for a long time. What we're doing right now is actually now starting to put some data to some of these anecdotal observations. And some data that are hot off the press, not even published yet. Some of the DNR's Wetland Research Group, some results they just presented at the Wildlife Academy last week. They don't have the number of wetlands, but they were looking at broods of wood ducks. The average distance a brood travels in the first few weeks is 0.35 miles, and the maximum they covered was 1.6 miles. So who knows how many wetlands they're going to cover in all that time. But broods, almost all research shows that a brood doesn't hatch, walk to a wetland, and stay there. They move from lots of different wetlands over the course of that first summer. A place like this has lots of wetlands for them to key off on. Our last 2 sites yesterday, we talked about wetland complexes, multiple wetlands in the same area, same idea. Okay, why do we need different wetlands? You can just read through these. These are some of the descriptions of different types of wetlands that different waterfowl use. And I forgot the site. This is, Belrose, 1976. So blue and teal, shallow marshes and sloughs, gadwalls, marshes or small lakes, pintails, ponds with dense but low vegetation. And then you see the three descriptions there of the three different diving ducks that would nest in Minnesota. And again, you can just see every species likes a slightly different wetland. And again, each species will use a different types of wetlands over the course of the summer. Okay, wetland restoration. This is Prairie Dunes WMA up in Norman County. This was a LSOHC acquisition, a partnership with the DNR, Pheasants Forever, and the Prairie Chicken Society. On the left, you can see an aerial photo of the site, and you can see a lot of tile lines and a lot of really dry wetlands. On the right is a photo provided by Saban Adams at Pheasants Forever, about two-thirds of the way through the wetland restoration. So again, we don't have one wetland on the site. We have dozens and dozens of wetlands, different sizes, different shapes, different depths, etc. There's something out there for everyone. Fire and grasslands. Fire is a very popular tool across the Minnesota and upper Midwest. What it does many things. First off, and most obviously, it removes thatch. It does warm the soil. The fire itself does not warm the soil. It's the sun on that black ash over the next few days. Stimulates insects that are overwintering below ground, such as grasshoppers. Walk into a burned prairie a week later, and it's just teeming with inverts. It will increase the diversity and growth of both grasses and forbs. It's not real good nesting cover, maybe for pintails, but not much else. In 4 weeks, that picture is going to be awesome foraging habitat for prairie chickens, for pheasants, for grassland songbirds, and next spring it's going to be really nice nesting habitat. One thing to focus on here is it's often delayed gratification when it comes to enhancement. Sometimes it's an immediate bang for the buck, but often we're doing enhancements for next year or the following year. Okay, grazing in wetlands. Grazing is a tool that doesn't get used nearly as much as fire does in Minnesota. Here are a couple of quotes, Al Hochbaum and Lyle Souls, both students of Leopold. Water without loafing spots is not acceptable territory to these species, specifically dabbler ducks. Densely vegetated shores will not attract and hold high populations of surface feeding ducks during late summer and fall. The trampling of edges by cattle destroys the vegetation and improves loading areas for ducks.
Great.
Yes.
Won't changing water levels do the same thing versus cattle trampling the edges?
Yes and no. One of the things we have issues with in Minnesota is our hybrid cattail, and water levels can do that if we have a water control structure or a pump handy. Cattle will get in there and just trash cattails and really open those areas up. And again, we're not saying graze it to dirt, graze it every year, but we're saying when done with a conservation focus, cattle can be a fantastic tool for a lot of different things. Okay, grassland structure and paths. Two photos there. And again, imagine you're a pheasant chick or a duckling you just hatched a few hours ago. You weigh less than 2 feathers and you have 2 toothpicks for feet, or if you're a duck, 2 toothpicks with big floppy things at the end of them. And Bennett 1938, Baker 1953, again, cutting edge stuff. It was just published yesterday. Just to point out, we've known this for quite a while. These are big names in the conservation community. So talking about ducks, Bennett did the blue-winged teal of Iowa. Grass-grown cow paths seem to be used by blue and teal as lanes of travel when they are available. Apparently, too dense of vegetation growth makes traveling difficult. Al Hochbaum up at Delta Marsh talks about ducks going for a mile or more along a cow path versus a few feet through really thick stuff to get to the nearest wetland. Baker, talking about prairie chickens down in Kansas. The paths in small areas reduce cover resulting from the activities of cattle facilitate the movement of young birds, and provide suitable areas for sunning times when the grass is wet. Okay, foraging and habitat, we're getting a little more current with our research. Dachshund and Carroll, some research down in Iowa. Feeding rates of bobwhite chicks were sensitive to vegetation influence mobility. Management of fields for both pheasants and quail chicks that can be reconciled by practices that prevent more open space at ground level. The DNR and lots of other states, we do our August roadside surveys in August. The reason we do that is on cool mornings with lots of dew, the birds have to come out on the edges of the roads to dry off and warm up in the morning. If we have some open areas out in the grass, they can just go out in the grass and find those open areas. Anderson, I believe this was down, Sandhills, Missouri, land manager for the prairie chicken in the Sandhills regions, provide brooding habitat and grazed ecological upland sites. Okay, managing nesting cover. There's the whole idea of dense nesting cover, which works for some species, but not all species. So I just showed a range of ducks on the left and songbirds and on the right. So the gadwall, tall, dense vegetation, very similar to what mallards would like. Blue wings, they actually like hay fields. It's a little shorter. And pintails, they'll practically nest on bare dirt. In fact, they often nest on bare dirt. Henslow sparrows, they like it as tall, thick, and dense as you can get. Bobolinks like moderate vegetation. Upland sandpipers, moderately grazed pastures. So again, if we want to provide habitat across the landscape, not necessarily within one WMA or WPA, we need to have all these different vegetation structures out there at a landscape scale across different properties and different property types if we want to have a high diversity and a high abundance of all these species. Grasslands and inverts. Inverts are pretty cool by themselves, but they are also the foundation for the diets of almost all grassland birds, ducks, game birds, and songbirds. For the first month or so of their life, their diet is 100% inverts. So here are just some names. You can see, obviously, the more plants we have, the greater plant diversity, the more insects we're going to have. In the first bullet point, in the second bullet point, it talks about the different parts of a plant that some of the insects key in on. It's the stem, the leaf, the seed, the flower. And then in the third bullet point, even within one plant, silphium or compass plant, you've got different individual species focusing on different parts of that plant. So the greater plant diversity we have out there, the higher number of species in our seed mixes, the more insects we're going to have out there and other inverts. Again, very interesting in and of themselves, but also primary food base for a lot of the area or a lot of the birds that we care about. Okay, we all live downstream to kind of take this out of the wildlife realm. Here are a couple of studies that have come out of the University of Minnesota recently talking about wetlands and water quality. So again, there are lots of ways to clean up our waters. One of the best ways, the most effective ways is habitat restoration. And with that, I'll take any questions and then we have our panelists come up.
Any questions? Yep. How do I do that?
Thank you, Greg. This is a little bit beside the topic, but it's about wetlands. I hear this all the time from duck hunters that they had a wetland that they hunted ducks on, it's full of freshwater shrimp. And then the DNR came to that wetland and decided to use it as a walleye rearing pond. And the ducks disappear. They're saying the walleyes are eating all the shrimp and duck, whatever natural duck food is in there. Has there been any research on that, or do you know if this is true or not?
I can't speak directly to walleye stocking or any other stocking. There is a large amount of research out there on fish and ducks, and they don't get along at all. And there's a couple of reasons, and most of the research I am familiar with is actually talking about the smaller fish, the fathead minnows, the sticklebacks. I don't know my fish very well. But it's more the smaller, the bait fish type of things. And there's really two things going on. A lot of those fish will get down into the mud and stir it up and take a clear water body and make it cloudy. Therefore, the aquatic plants can't get going, especially the submerged vegetation. So you're gonna alter the plant community at the site. There's also a lot of research talking about the inverts. Just mentioned, and we talked yesterday about doing drawdowns to kill fish at Bob WPA. Fish are voracious invert predators. So that when you've got fish in those wetlands, they are gobbling up a lot of the inverts that the ducks would like to be eating. And so there's actually a lot of research from the Midwest. There's a lot of research from Northern Europe that shows the same thing. So it comes down to, again, a complicated landscape, like I talked about in some of those earlier slides. And it's not an either or, it's not an absolute one or the other, but you know, where do we want to be focusing on a fisheries or a specific body of water? And where do we want to be focusing on ducks or other things for that body of water? And those are complicated discussions. Yeah, again, if you want easy answers, it's really not a good career to take.
So I'm curious about the cattle grazing in the loafing areas. I mean, do you use cattle as a tool in any wildlife management areas then for portions of it?
Yes, we do. Both the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the DNR do use cattle on our WMAs and WPAs. I know the Fish and Wildlife Service has used cattle on even some of their national wildlife refuges. We also do a fair amount of haying on our state and our federal properties. And again, it's how you use the tool. Give me a drip torch, I can do a lot of damage if I don't use it well and respect the tool. Give me a drip torch, I can create beautiful habitat later this summer. Same thing with a cow or herd of cattle. Same thing with a chainsaw or an axe in the forest. It's not the tool, it's how we use it. And that gets back to Leopold's creative use of the tool, not just willy-nilly doing whatever and not monitoring.
So as follow-up to that, I mean, I'm kind of interested in cattail views of our group in terms of where I live in the Brainerd area. Our cattails seem to be like taking over all of our wetland areas and little lakes. I mean, is that an acceptable tool then to control cattails, or what do you normally see for controlling cattails?
So for cattails, this is not my area. Just talking to colleagues and friends and multiple agencies and NGOs, we use a little bit of everything. For smaller wetlands, cattle are great. I've seen some photos from Sherburne National Wildlife Refuge from quite a few years ago, 10 or so, where there was a pretty big basin that was, a wren couldn't even land in there. And they put cattle in there and basically put a fence right around the perimeter, and they double, triple, quadruple stock it. I don't know what they did. They beat the holy heck out of it for a few days and then pulled the cattle off. Oh, there was a wetland in there. But our larger bodies of water will typically use a helicopter spray, and the DNR has one of those, and some of our partners also work on that. So mechanical, we also have some equipment like Marsh Masters that can get in there and chop up the cattail. So it's really a site specific, what's the best tool for this particular site, just like everything.
Yeah, I'm kind of intrigued because it makes where I live on a couple of natural environment lakes, and prior to me buying, a developer developed land parcels around there. Prior to that, there was actually cattle in there. People talk about how great the duck hunting was in this little natural environment lake. And the cattle got moved out because got sold off in chunks, and the cattails have taken over. And there's a few ducks left, but there ain't many. But so I'm going, maybe it was the cattle all that time that was effectively helping create the habitat for the ducks. So interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, great.
Great. Really interesting presentation. My question is somewhat related to that. And, at the risk of being a one-person focus group, as I drive around the countryside, if I see a yellow sign, a WMA, by and large, it looks like it's going to be pretty good habitat and it's managed pretty well. when I see a green and white sign, it's very much hit or miss. Sometimes they're beautiful and really seem well managed. Sometimes it's grown grass and seems like cattle or a cattail choked. And I don't know if that's accurate or not, but wanted to get your perspective on the contrast between WMAs and WPAs in terms of the ability to secure funding, to execute projects, and to actually get habitat on the ground. Are there significant differences between the two?
Thank you for the question. I'm actually going to take the chicken way out of that, and I think some of the panelists were gonna address that. So I will, if you would allow me, I will pass that off, and they were gonna talk about working with all the different partners.
Great, thank you.
I will literally hand the baton. I should go to the back of the line. Yes.
Anywhere along those chairs, we'll be able to see you. If you can just pass the microphone.
I started. Right, well, I'm not gonna start with answering that question right away. Good morning, Mr. Chair and council members. My name is David Adams. I'm the Minnesota State Coordinator with Pheasants Forever. I'm gonna try to be brief so we can get to conversations, but Joe had mentioned that he wanted us to go through a couple things. What was going well, what was not going well, and how can the council help? And I've been thinking about that basically since I woke up this morning until about 5 seconds ago, and now it's continuing. So yesterday we went on the tour, and there were some really awesome things that happened that you could see play out. And for Pheasants Forever, within a 50-mile radius, I ran some GIS stuff. We've acquired 9,877 acres of land, fee title and easement within a 50-mile radius of where we're sitting. That's 66 fee title tracts and 2 easements with the Fish and Wildlife Service. We've also done 101 restoration and enhancement projects for 30,582 acres within a 50-mile radius. So we're doing a whole bunch of work here. I wish John Lindstrom was here. Him and I have had a long conversation many times about in our careers, the Outdoor Heritage Fund has been here the whole entire time. We've had this bastion of wealth to do conservation work in the state of Minnesota, but we hear all the time from the people before us about partnerships. And it's actually kind of hard for us to understand that, because it's like, why do I need a partner? We got a whole lot of money and we can just do all this stuff all by ourselves. And what do we need to partner with anybody for? And then yesterday, you know, when I'm thinking about, okay, we've done 66 fee title land acquisitions within this Fergus Falls area. Well, why has Fergus Falls been so successful? Yesterday, you saw a project where we had a Pheasants Forever Habitat Partnership specialist that was working on a Fergus Falls Fish and Game property that has a Fish and Wildlife easement, utilizing MLT's funding to do the restoration that is on. I can't even think of all of the people that are connected. And then they call Ducks Unlimited help with the engineering design. And I think a big part of the success in this area is because we're utilizing all of the resources and the people and the know-how to do all of this stuff instead of working in one enclosed thought space of just, you know, this is Pheasants Forever money and Pheasants Forever's place. And so what I think is, you know, we find successes in the partnership. The struggle is constantly reminding ourselves that we're all kind of working together and accomplishing the same thing. If the Nature Conservancy buys the property and restores all the wetlands on it and opens it up to the public and restores the prairie, well, then there's pheasants, there's ducks, there's public access, there's all the things, and Pheasants Forever wins too. And so I think that's kind of the struggle. That's the thing that I think about constantly is how can I help them to accomplish their stuff, to help us accomplish ours. But I think the other side of this equation with partnerships is all of the work that the council does in terms of, and this is kind of how can the council help.
keep us competing, keep us competitive. If John figures out a way to buy a whole bunch of wildlife management areas, more than Pheasants Forever, and does a really good job, the council gives more money to Ducks Unlimited, and I'm gonna chase you, and I'm gonna try to figure out how Pheasants Forever is gonna do that in the future, and likewise for all the rest of you. But keep us on our toes, make sure we're being efficient, make sure we're utilizing the taxpayers' dollars efficiently and accomplishing the goals of the council. And then on the back end, we're all gonna work together and do the best we can. Sorry if I got a little trite.
Well, good morning, Chair Hartwell and council members. Thank you for inviting us up to just enlighten you about all of the grassland work that we do in this part of the state and well beyond. Greg did an excellent job queuing us up to just showing off those maps, showing off all of the different ways that we enhance and restore prairies and wetlands. In this part of the state, in terms of, I should introduce myself, hold on. I'm Liz Beery. I'm with the Nature Conservancy as our Associate Director of Grasslands in Minnesota. I oversee a team of staff who are scattered around the prairie region of the state, and they're all implementing excellent work, protecting prairie, both on behalf of the Nature Conservancy to add on to and expand our existing Nature Conservancy preserves. And then we also have a really strong partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service through our Northern Tallgrass Prairie National Wildlife Refuge program as well. So partnerships there are very much focused on U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service offices around the state, and a lot of our Minnesota Prairie Recovery Program work is with Fish and Wildlife Service and the Minnesota DNR. And of course, we're often coordinating in conjunction with Pheasants Forever, Ducks Unlimited, Minnesota Land Trust, and beyond when we have different partner meetings to coordinate our efforts and focus on which areas do we want to do this work. How do we go about it? We all have slightly different priorities, with our agencies or organizations, we have different missions, but in many, many cases, those missions align in terms of improving habitat and trying to put as much public resource access out there, or allowing, private landowners to enhance and maintain conservation land in perpetuity. In terms of what's been going really well with our programs, not a ton of our work is focused directly in this landscape because we already have excellent partners that have taken on the lion's share of work directly here. But our closest landscape where the Nature Conservancy focuses very heavily is up in our Bluestem Prairie and Blazing Star landscapes just to the northwest of here. Again, in those landscapes, we work really closely with our partners, Pheasants Forever, Minnesota Prairie Chicken Society, DNR, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And we've been able to really expand some of those habitat complexes in those areas. And that just, as Greg mentioned, adds to the diversity of habitat, adds to the diversity of prairie and wetlands, and creates those really intact complexes. So that's been extremely successful for us, and much of it is due to Outdoor Heritage Fund dollars that we've been able to utilize and leverage to get much of that work done. And a big part of that is staff funding, because again, we can't get this work done without the staff on the ground looking for potential protection opportunities, designing the restoration and enhancement projects, and being able to implement on the ground management, including invasive species control, prescribed fire, woody removal. Our staff run Conservation Corps of Minnesota crews throughout the season, so we're able to use up and coming conservation focused individuals who want to learn and want to do a lot of this this work on the ground, cutting trees, spraying weeds, collecting seed to benefit the diverse prairie restorations that we're installing. So those are things that have been going really well for our programs. Some of our biggest challenges are, kind of big picture, but in terms of climate change, we're seeing more unpredictable weather cycles. We're seeing cooler, wetter springs, which often boost the non-native grasses that we're often trying to set back. So brome, Kentucky bluegrass, green canary, all kind of benefit from those more unusual weather patterns that we're starting to see. But we're able to continue managing those with grazing, sustainable conservation grazing, or using well-timed prescribed fire to try and set back some of those grasses and really enhance our native prairie grass and forb species. In addition to that, just these unpredictable weather patterns can sometimes make it harder to implement some of these management actions or enhancement actions, but we're still able to innovate and find methods that work well for the resources that we're trying to restore. So despite those challenges, we do find solutions to them, but that definitely will only continue to evolve as we handle these changes in the future. And one thing that the council could assist us with addressing some of these challenges is just continuing to support successful programs that already have a lot of knowledge and expertise, and we have a great track record of completing projects, and we're able to continue working at a strong pace to protect more habitat, whether it's adding to big complexes, whether it's adding to that patchwork quilt of habitat throughout the state, but just continuing to support the programs and the staff that are implementing all of the work on the ground would be hugely beneficial to our effectiveness over time. And one other thing that we're currently doing is just providing education and an educational opportunity. Everyone out here who joined us on the tour yesterday had the chance to see all of the work that we're doing and like Greg mentioned, understand the why behind what we're doing, and you get to see what it looks like on the ground. It's great when you see it on paper, see proposals, see final reports, but it just means something completely different when you can see it in person. So continuing to explore, continuing to ask questions and want to know more is a fantastic way to assist us in the future.
Thanks, Liz. John Schneider with Ducks Unlimited. I live in Alexandria, so I kind of live in this general area, cover the whole state. Thank you, council members, Mr. Chair, for joining us in our top priority landscape here. This really is the best of the best. You saw it yesterday. Greg did a great job of reviewing the scientific basis for what wildlife need, and why and where, and what we're doing about it. Things are going really well here, as you saw yesterday. The partnerships, I can't stress that enough, with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's been going on for many years, but especially over the last year, 6 months, is really important to helping the service implement their mission, our missions to restore habitat for waterfowl and other migratory birds. The money that's used to buy easements in waterfowl production areas comes from the Migratory Bird Conservation Fund, which is the federal duck study. $25 if you want to go shoot ducks in lease. That money can only be spent on buying land or buying easements, but it can't be spent to restore it. So what a great partnership. We have the Outdoor Heritage Fund to help us restore those lands and wetlands. The federal funds pay for the land and easements, and we've got great partnerships here, as you saw yesterday. The challenge for the NGOs, including Ducks Unlimited, our mission is obviously waterfowl, wetlands, and associated habitats and migratory birds primarily. To use OHF funds on the ground, the land has to be either public land or permanently protected private land. So we have to partner with state and federal agencies to implement our mission. We can't implement our mission, generally speaking, especially here in Minnesota, without partnerships. Private landowners are the other key partner in that whole mix. So state, federal agencies and private landowners. And yes, we can get a big bag of money, but without partnerships, we really can't spend it, is what I'm trying to say. So what you saw yesterday is really the key. We're really interested in promoting more working lands conservation easements for all the reasons Greg laid out. It's great. And you saw yesterday cattle on the landscape to address the question, you know, hybrid cattail are a challenge, but reed canary grass has been here for a long time and that continues to be a challenge. And there's lots of invasive species like that that can be addressed with management. Management is really the challenge. Staff to manage land. We're aware of the cost of people, both at the federal level, the state level, and the NGO level, cost of people in our proposals. We can't do the restoration, but we certainly can't do the enhancement, and the agencies can't do the management that the wildlife need without people. So we appreciate the support for that. And the last thing I'd say is I would just encourage the council to think about science, think about the scientific basis for proposals when you get funding requests. Think about the presentation that Greg showed and what the science says wildlife needs. People need things, we know what people need, but we use science to figure out what wildlife needs. For example, for waterfowl, our science out of the Dakotas is at least a 40% of the landscape needs to be in idle grass or wetland habitat for ducks to produce enough to overcome predation in the spring. At least on a 4 square mile area, preferably on a township size basis. And as you saw yesterday, we have some of that around Lake Christina and other areas here in Minnesota, but we've got big challenges further south. We're trying to build these complexes out of pretty much nothing in southern Minnesota, or very little, trying to expand on those patch sizes. And that's our justification for buying land, buying easements, doing restoration work. Southern prairie Minnesota, where there's very little public land for the public to use, but there's also very little habitat for breeding ducks and pheasants and non-game birds to use as well. So building those complexes, and the last thing I'd say is we're real hopeful that the Minnesota DNR's duck plan and pheasant plans will recently announced will result in some additional coordinated planning among the agencies and the NGOs where we can identify those complexes to grow in size and quality. So thank you.
Hi. Hartwell, council members. I'm Wayne Ostlund, the Director of Land Protection of the Minnesota Land Trust. The Minnesota Land Trust works in this region through protection of lands through conservation easements, working with private landowners. We also have a very robust restoration program here in partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services private lands program. Both are very active in this geography. If you're looking at, you saw a lot of that during the yesterday, but also a lot of other examples that extend well beyond that to other parts of Western Minnesota as well. We're, as you saw yesterday, one of lots of different partners here working to implement the prairie plan out in this part of the state. So there's a rich array of incredible partners working here. We work off generally, even though, as it was mentioned, may have different missions and so forth. Generally, we're working around common goals, working off the same plan, as well as building off of each other's work. We're very complementary in that sense. In many ways, it's far less about whose acres they are that get on the ground, but more important that they do get on it. And so there are many conservation options available. I'll be talking mostly about the private land side of the equation because that's the arena in which the Minnesota Land Trust works for the most part. And because of those different options, whether they come through the Minnesota Land Trust or Florida Water Soil Resources or the DNR or other partners working in that sphere, each of those options is a little different and attracts a little different group of people to the conservation equation. We have a large number of different conservation easement programs, for example, playing out here. that attracts a broader array of landowners than if there was only one. And so that complementarity and the building up of options for landowners is very important to see in order to achieve the results that we saw yesterday, some years that we were visiting. Ultimately, you know, the success that we have in some of these areas builds off of the work that we're doing. The action of partners fuels awareness, which in turn generates more interest and participation. As I mentioned yesterday during the tour, conservation success out in geography like this requires kind of an approach that is, we need the fee land acquisition protection piece of the equation. We very much need the ability to work with private landowners where those lands can be protected and stored. They stay on the tax roll, so they benefit the counties that way. And the landowners can live on those lands and pass them on from generation to generation. So that marriage of the approaches is very effective, and I think I would argue a central piece of the equation if we really want to and we're serious about achieving success in these places. So some of the biggest challenges that we see, and some have been mentioned already, capacity to do the work. At that last stop, I think those of you that were on the tour yesterday got a real sense of kind of the people power that was necessary to achieve success and how those resources are shared and utilized across the partnership as a whole is very important. So for many of us sitting up here, you know, we've been invested in these geographies for multiple places. I think for Minnesota Land Trust Fish and Wildlife Service, we're 10, 11, 12 years into the equation. I think each of us are probably with similar duration of programs. That's very important. We're going to attract talent, staff into these positions and nurture those positions through time and retain that staff over. We can't achieve the success that we were showing and demonstrating yesterday in one-off type proposals. So that is what's really underpins, I think, in many ways, the success of what we're seeing out here in Western Minnesota. With the uncertainties of federal funding into the equation, a lot of positions here have drawn from and utilized federal funding. And it's going to be more important that we, in order to sustain our actions here, that's one of the things that the council can help us do out here in Western Minnesota is enable us to use additional personnel costs to offset some of those. I think with that, I will leave it. I just want to say, I guess one more thing is that, in terms of the support from the council over the years has really been instrumental in achieving a lot of this stuff. And that blend of public and private participation in the mix has been supported by the council very strongly. And that's one thing, like continuance of that into the future will enable us to do even more on places like this. Thank you.
Great. Any questions? Yes.
I was very impressed with all the projects we looked at yesterday, but it brought to mind a question I have about, you mentioned, Mr. Snyder, maintenance. In southern Minnesota, southwestern Minnesota, if there's a wetland or a pothole, you notice that because it's cattails. And a lot of that's on private land. But there's a wildlife management area west of Redwood Falls along the Minnesota River. It's about 650 acres. It was 2 generations before it became wildlife management area, but people ran beef cattle on it. And in the area, it was famous for being apparently the best deer hunting patch of property around. You can't walk through it now because of buckthorn. I mean, you literally would need a chainsaw to try and walk through it. And I see that, and I don't want to pick on the DNR for not being able to maintain the wildlife management areas, but what plans are built in to those sites we saw yesterday? So that if we come back 20 years from now, they're not all buckthorn or reed canary grass or whatever the invasives are that would, in a sense, make it worse than it was before you started.
Thanks for the question and great observation. I don't know the site you're referring to, but in general, regarding the parcels we looked at yesterday, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service owns the right for management of private lands under their easements and obviously on the federal waterfowl production areas. So they have management plans and they monitor the conditions of those sites to ensure that they're in optimal condition for breeding birds. It's primarily a breeding habitat program. You know, there's no assured funding, there's no escrow account for management in any agency. We just have to trust that state and federal budgets will remain robust enough to fund those management of those lands. I think when it gets to the point where, you know, it's socked in with buckthorn or hybrid cattail or trees in the prairie, which is a real concern because trees create hostile bird habitat. In tall trees, predators can perch and predate the birds that are sitting on nests. We can come in through OHF luckily and say, hey, we need to enhance that habitat because it's degraded for whatever reason. If it's an enhancement, we can do that. If it's maintenance or repair, that's something the agencies are responsible. That's my
I
understanding.
feel like I should go buy a herd of cattle, go out like the goat people and circle the wetlands with electric fence and just go from wetland to wetland.
Well, and to your point, we're all working with state and federal agencies to try and do more, call it managed conservation grazing of public lands. Not every year, the same time, the same way, but as a management tool, it can be very effective. And it's great to support livestock, the livestock industry as well, in terms of integrating livestock into family farms. We'd love to see more of that on the landscape, and if we can help address management issues on public lands and also support livestock producers as another place they can raise their livestock. But that takes people to manage that too. We can't just say, sure, go ahead and walk away. And so it all comes back to people to manage that.
Thank you.
Darryl, you have a question?
Well,
I would just say-
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think, did we answer Matt's question? Matt had a question, so I want to make sure Matt gets his done, then I've got a question.
Have a chance right after.
All right, so you're saying you have challenges, you know, you've got the capacity to do with people. And my question is, how many people do you have now in terms of as your teams? And how many people do you think you need, short-term and long-term? Oh, everyone.
Ducks Unlimited has 21 conservation staff here in the state. We started with 2 in 1999. So, you know, we've grown, but that's not all funded with state OHF. Our programs are very diverse. Our funding streams are very diverse. So it's a really, I'm not trying to be evasive, but we don't have like a goal of hiring 30 people to do X, Y, and Z. It's really opportunistic. That's the other thing I wanted to say is, you know, conservation has to be opportunistic. We have to work with private landowners. We don't know who's going to want to do what. There was a couple of years when it was tough to buy land in Minnesota because prices were rising and our appraisals were behind the curve, if you will. Then things change and all of a sudden we get calls from sellers of land to sell land, and we've got more land we can buy than we have funding for. So it's really tough to predict the need for staff from our perspective, again, to protect, restore, and enhance. staffing of the agencies is the other half of the equation to maintain and manage and repair and so it's hard to describe. Say we go ahead.
I agree with what John said, in terms of it's very hard to predict. There's a whole lot of chicken and egg that happens when you're writing a proposal. Well, if I get this much money, then I can have this much staff. Have this much staff, then we can spend this much money. And at some point, you just got to make a decision whether this is what we're going to propose and this is what we're going to try to do. The one thing that I come back to and that was mentioned just about by everybody was the sustainability of when you get good staff who can do a job and build relationships with a contractor, build relationships with the Fish and Wildlife, the DNR, with the private landowners, maintaining that person in that spot so that they can keep working and keep building and getting better at their career, which means you gotta pay them more every year, which means we gotta, it comes a little less efficient because we gotta put a little bit more money into them, but then hopefully they're bringing the efficiency back up. It's finding this balance of enough people to deliver the specific outcome that you're looking for, and maintaining that person. And I think there's quite a few people in the room that know the situation that we're in right now. With federal funding, Pheasants Forever, we recently lost a big federal grant that was employing people. And we're gonna have to let some people go that are very good at their jobs because we just lost the funding. And that's a priority shift by the federal administration. But as we lose those people, we're gonna see our ability to accomplish these goals go down significantly because we lost quality people. It's not a matter of like, we lose funding for a couple of years, we'll just hop right back in the game and be good at it again. No, we'll have to get rid of those people and they'll go find some other job and they'll find something else to do. And when we have to start over from scratch, we're starting over from scratch. And so how many is a guess, but keeping good people at work is really important.
My comment back to you is, you're no different than any business,
Correct?
right? Every business has challenges. They lose customers, they lose government contracts, they have to manage around that. And,
Absolutely.
and you're looking to us for funding, and I acknowledge that you've been great partners. And I'm just saying, okay, I'm a business person, so I'm looking at it saying, all right, what's your 5-year plan? Or what's your budget? And I acknowledge you've got a hiccup you're dealing with, but then it's like, all right, where are we at driving our business? What's our priorities? What's our goals? Is kind of how mine works. So I'm just thinking through that. Have we accomplished what you want in terms of acquisition? What's our maintenance cost going forward to take care of what we have as opposed to growth, right? There's two different parts of that. So my mind just goes to, well, where are we at in achieving our goals and what are our needs? What do we have now? And I know you guys are, in this, I'll call it a growth phase where it kind of looks to me like, so, but when you have a problem of a revenue stream, then how do you deal with that? And I don't have an answer for you. I'm asking you guys, how are you going to deal with it?
I would say they're gonna deal with it the best they can.
Just like every business does.
Everybody goes through these struggles of feast and famine and.
Yep.
And you didn't have money 20 years ago to do what you're doing today, you build to it. The federal situation is gonna hurt a lot of people in the process and we'll recover from it because we have no choice. Matt, you have a question? It wasn't fully.
Yeah, I was kind of going back to my original question, which was very long. I'll make it even shorter. Greg's presentation, slide 2, showed like 9 different signs from different kinds of properties. Are any of those more difficult or easier to actually do habitat on in terms of permitting, in terms of regulation, in terms of do you look at a yellow sign and go thumbs up and look at a different one and say, oh man, this is going to be tough? Or is that not a easy comparison to make?
Thanks for the question, Matt. It's not an easy comparison to make, and it's not a question that is fun to answer per se. It depends. It can be very, very variable because just like everything else in life, there are some areas and some people that are hard to work with that you don't get along with all that well, and there are some areas and staff that are easy to work with. I think another challenge that comes up, just to be completely transparent about this, is I look at what we were talking about today, what Greg mentioned with management of properties and grazing. And I'm not familiar with the whole state, so I'm not trying to throw out any punches in any particular place, but I look at the Fish and Wildlife Service in the Morris District. They are grazing all over the place. They've got some real champions for grazing. JB down there is doing a ton of grazing projects, and so they're accomplishing a lot of that. And when I look at how they did it, it always comes back to kept it pretty simple, made good relationships with local farmers and ranchers, had a guy who's been there for a long time, JB, a great employee, who built relationships and got people grazing cattle in those places. And it was, the more simple, the more effective it is. And just throwing it out, that when I talk to managers at the DNR about, hey, why aren't we grazing more of the WMAs? They go, because it's too hard. Because I got too much paperwork to do, and I gotta go over there and I gotta do CWD checks, and I gotta go and do this. Somebody's mad about wolves over here and geese over here and too many deer, not enough deer, and I don't have time to go and round up cattle. We've just made it too hard for them to do the management in some of those places, and it can flip flop depending on the area. And then the last thing, and then I'll pass it on, is you also have to recognize that each one of those signs has a different priority. I'm also on a chapter of Pheasants Forever that I volunteer on, and my local chapter guys, they like to go and hunt pheasants, and they're always like, how come that waterfowl production area doesn't have more spots where I can shoot pheasants? And I go, because it's a waterfowl production area. Like, you can go and shoot pheasants out there, but we're gonna get rid of the cattails where the pheasants live because it's there to produce ducks. There are some pheasants, but it's got a different purpose.
And I can just add on to that original question. So I guess in terms of, I wouldn't say one type of land ownership is easier to manage over another per se, but you know, the more, I guess, steps involved or the more partnerships or land ownerships involved can add more complexity. You just need to coordinate with more people, ensure you're meeting the objectives of each individual, you know, manager or biologist. So at least in terms of the land that we've been able to protect and add on to existing nature conservancy preserves, in a way, those are, I would say, a little easier to restore and manage, just because, you know, maybe we only have 2 or 3 staff coordinating internally and coming up with plans and implementing them. But we really find the value landscape wide to also work closely with Fish and Wildlife Service and the Minnesota DNR to not only focus on our own properties, but also to focus on the larger landscape as well. So there's a lot of value, whether or not it might take a little extra coordination or maybe longer term planning in order to get there. So there's a lot of value in that, no matter what the land ownership is. And the other thing I was gonna add, the other thing I wanted to add is that you know, if you're hearing feedback from hunters or just public land users in terms of like, oh, I prefer this WMA over this WPA for XYZ reasons, there are definitely different funding resources for federal versus state staff. There's different funding resources for federal versus state lands in terms of project funding, or focus on wetlands versus prairie versus deer wintering habitat. So, you know, each entity has their own prioritization system. I know for a fact, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, especially, you know, I have a lot of experience with the Morris Fish and Wildlife Office. They have a very intricate prioritization system. They realize they have finite resources, so they know they have over 250 WPAs to manage. So they have to create tiers. You know, they realize they can't adequately, perfectly manage everyone. So they come up with a system in order to say, these are the very highest priority. We're going to put a lot of resources and monitoring and efforts into, you know, these, and then we have to tier down other areas. So there's always going to be some that there's still habitat there, they're still providing a value to that, and they hope in the future they can, you know, do additional management. But I'm sure the DNR has a different system that also works well for how they prioritize those. So one isn't necessarily better than the other, but it just provides different results over the span of time. So just to add into that.
Thank you.
So keep it short because I'm going to cut this off. We're running quite late.
I'll be very short. For Minnesota Land Trust, our restoration team works very closely and almost specifically with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on a lot around the restoration of properties. And, it takes time, has taken time for any individual to learn how the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the hoops and need to jump through in order to position it for the way that they needed them. And so, our game plan out here has really been to work specifically with that organization, that agency. A lot of work to be done still, but keeping it focused with the one agency is built in a lot of efficiencies because we know how to do that, and staff we bring on get to know how to do that. If we flip that over to Minnesota Land Trust easements, that's a different equation because there you're dealing with every landowner is a different individual, has different priorities, has different desires for their own land. So that if you were to talk to our restoration staff, that takes a lot of conversation. Doing restoration, understanding kind of what needs to be done, what their desires for the property are, working with them to build kind of that game plan for restoration on their property going forward time. That's the communication and the relationship piece that needs to play out with each land.
Great. Thank you, Ron. You wanted to say something?
I'm gonna move on. I wanted to put you people in our position. You've been telling us your issues. Here's one issue I have. I've been looking at your proposals for years. And there's 4 prairie here. There are gonna be 2 or 3 or 4 more. As I look through the pages, etc. Millions here. You want a million, you want several million, you want several million. And I go, we got a lot of prairie proposals. Is there a better one than the rest? That we should give more money to this one instead of that one? Are they all equal? Do you talk to each other? Are you outbidding, trying to outbid each other for some things? Do you have a goal? Well, how long is this going to go on in perpetuity? I mean, I understand there's a lot of prairie disappeared. I understand there's a lot of wetlands disappeared in Minnesota the last 100 years or more. But these are questions that goes through my mind. I don't know if you can make a proposal any different. I'm not asking that. I'm just telling you, this is as my own self. This is what goes through my mind as I look at all these prairie requests and wonder, is there a better one? Because you're all asking for a lot of money and you all deserve them. But and I don't need an answer here. I just wanted you to know that.
You're not going to get it. Thank you all for taking.
Thank you very much.
For the tours yesterday. We're going to move on because we are running a little late. The next thing we're going to go to is agenda item 7, the review and approval of accomplishment plans. For those of you that are new, we go through a process of recommending an amount of funding. And when we get clear on how much funding we want to recommend, we ask everyone to put in an accomplishment plan. So specifically, this is what I'm going to do if I get this money, more detailed than the proposal. Those get modified a couple of times, perhaps because funding amounts change as we go forward. What we're looking at today are mostly things we've seen in the past because funding amounts stayed the same. There were some changes, but ultimately we've seen plans that look like what we're looking at today. In fact, staff has reviewed all of that. It's their job to say, hey, this one doesn't make sense. You need to look at it. I haven't heard anybody from the staff say somebody tried to slip a fast one in on us. We're going to take money out of project and sort it into place of health things. So our job today is to approve the accomplishment plans no money can be spent until we approve those accomplishment plans. So the money is allocated by the legislature, but if we don't approve these accomplishment plans, they can't start spending it. So that's why we're doing it in June. It's why it's important. Money's available to them starting July 1st, as long as we approve these accomplishments. And with that, I'll turn it over to Joe. Probably have a little bit more to say about it, but I bet I covered most of it.
Mr. Chair and members, so David was right. Staff reviewed all of the proposals. If we remember back to last fall, we started with a certain amount of total available funding. Then in December, we reallocated some extra funding that we thought we had. And then during the legislature in February, we found out that we actually had less money. So basically, we added money to the accomplishment plans, and then the partners had to unallocate again. And so what we did was we compared the accomplishment plans that were the first set of accomplishment plans before the increase in the fall. So we compared those because nothing should have changed between that time. And David was right. There's very small minor adjustments that the partners are allowed to do based on the time that has passed. So partners have updated their parcel list. So any project that the partner does, they have to have that parcel on the list prior to doing the work so they can get reimbursed for it. So some of the partners have updated their parcel list. There's been some slight modifications to budgets, like maybe 5% here and there. Nothing out of the ordinary that we thought needed to come back. So from the staff perspective, everything is good to go. Everybody's ready to get approved, except for one that maybe we're not approving.
Well, we'll get to that, but I just want to thank staff for doing the heavy lifting of reviewing all of these. I went through and read many of them. It's hard to get through all of the stuff. I know staff paid more attention than I did. I just want to thank you. Did you? Someone maybe. And John, I think you had something. I was forewarned.
Yes, you were. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Hartwell. Yeah, I would like to, at least for this month, I know there'll probably be a general motion to approve the accomplishment plans as they are, but the Big Swamp one, if you've got it in front of you, and maybe you don't, but there's still some issues with landowners up here I think we need to address locally, and I'd like to delay that one until next month, until we have a little more public input. There's some concerns about the ditches from the Drainage Commission back in the early 1900s on these lateral ditches that landowners are worried about flood risk there that they'd like addressed. And I think it's only right that we have a little deeper conversation locally about those lateral ditches before anything goes forward there.
So put words in your mouth.
Yep.
You're recommending approval of all the accomplishment plans except for the Big Swamp North one, which you would like to hold over for more discussion at our July meeting. Is that correct?
That's what actually, you could make that my motion if you'd like.
Thank you for making that motion. Are there any discussion? Will you call the roll? And I'm just going to tell everyone my computer is dying. So tell Tom you need to talk to me from this point on because I have to close down.
Mr. Chair and members, just for clarification, that's 4G as in Gary, Big Swamp North.
So the motion is to approve all of the accomplishment plans except 4G Big Swamp North, which we will take up in a month.
All right, Mr. Chair and members, starting with number 2 on our list, Shara.
Aye.
Shara, aye. Baird.
Aye.
Baird, aye. Representative Burkle.
Burkle, aye.
Burkle, I. Eggerling.
Aye.
Eggerling, I. Senator Hur.
Aye.
Senator Hur, I. Kaharski.
Kaharski, aye.
Kaharski, I. Senator Lang.
Aye.
Senator Lang, I. Palmer.
Aye.
Palmer, I. Saxhog.
Aye.
Saxhog, I. Suss.
Aye.
Suss, I. Representative Bang.
Aye.
Representative Bang, I. Hartwell.
Aye.
Hartwell, I. Mr. Chair, there are 12 ayes, 0 nays.
Great. So start spending money wisely. Thank you again to staff for doing the review, as well as I know many of you spent time looking at them, both in November, December, and so thank you for that. Next is project proposals, sort of the process we're about to go through. We had 58 proposals for $500 some million, much more money requested than we've had in the past. We have 160 million available to us. First step in the process is for each of us to review and rank the proposals, which will then be put together in a composite where we would look at the scoring and have a discussion about whether or not we want to then hear all of the proposals at our meetings in late August. There's always a little confusion for new people on the ranking process. And don't worry too much about getting it perfect. The way I rank versus the way Ted is going to rank is going to be different. Our view of whether something is worth 10 points, 8 points, 4 points will be different. And that's okay. What we're looking for is for you to be consistent in how you rank all the projects for you. And it works out just fine. So, you know, when it comes to scoring leverage, I may have a different way of scoring leverage than Daryl does, but as long as Daryl's consistent in how he does it and I'm consistent in how I do it, in the end, we see an overall scoring system that gives us a sense as to whether or not the proposal's on the right track at the last time. It also forces us all to understand the proposals. And that's truly more important than the scoring, but the scoring is a way to make sure we've actually read it. Understood. So with that, I will turn it over to Mark.
I guess one question I've asked of Mark and David, you and I visited about a little bit is when, again, I'm a newbie, right? So I'm looking at it, trying to go back in time a little bit to see where we've used our funds, you know, statewide, for whether it's fisheries or prairie pothole kind of things, or, you know, forest management. And one of the things that I read in our charter, if you want to call it that, was that we annually review our priorities. So I guess the ranking kind of is doing priorities, but I guess I looked at it a bit more holistically. I'm kind of with Ron saying, you know, I'm duck hunter as well, pheasant hunter, deer hunter. I mean, I like that we are preserving and protecting lands, but I also have to look at it and say, are we putting all of our eggs in one basket per se by continuing to fund this area, or are we going to set a priority and say that, you know, for the next 5 years, we're going to focus over here, or we're going to say 20% and 20% and 20% and 20% goes to these buckets. And you and I talked, and Mark and I talked, and I recognize that we're somewhat reactive in how we deal with this. And I guess I just wonder, you know, at what point in time do we have a stop discussion and say, these are the priority projects, the type of projects we're looking for?
I think there are probably 2 points to do that. And this, I would argue, is not the point. The first point is we're putting together the call for requests.
Okay.
Which is something we will do late this year this is about, do we have proposals that make sense?
Right.
Not about, I like forest better than wet.
Understanding we've got to review the projects we have coming in, but I guess I'm looking for a healthy discussion, I guess, at a different meeting than where we can say, where are we at? What have we accomplished? Where are we at? And where are we going? Is what I would like to see at some point here, because I look at the accomplishments. We've done great things. Our partners have great things. Are we still going on the same path? And maybe we're 100% on track. I don't know from people's perspectives, but I'd like to at least have a stop on a review.
I think you'll find we have, as we do application, we'll have that opportunity to have a discussion about, I think this is a priority versus that. Why do others feel that way as we come to a collective thing? And when we put the request for proposal, we can put an emphasis on this versus that. Those 2 times, so I think we should have this. Anyone disagree with that? Anyone online disagree with that? Or might be in the
Okay, by me.
Okay. Did I miss anything? I know I missed things.
Just a couple of things, Mr. Chair, members. We used to have these great big thick binders that everybody would have, and now most of you do it electronically. I know Daryl has asked for a binder, and I get a binder. Oh, Suzanne wants one as well. Okay. Anybody else tell me you want a binder again? Okay. Anybody online who wants a binder? Otherwise, everybody will have access to these project proposals online as well. And
A binder for the.
Oh, go ahead, Matt.
A binder for the proposals would be great. All the meeting materials as they are great, but a binder for the proposal would be really nice.
A physical binder, you mean?
Yeah, yes, please. Or a single PDF that I can print out.
Yes, yeah, so I'll have that. I just wanted to say if members have thoughts on how they're presented digitally, if there's a way that would make it easier. This year, I'm going to try and have both PDF and Word links plus a single downloads where you can download all at one time. But if you have any thoughts on how better to present that to make it easier to review, just let me know.
Great, thank you.
And we'll be getting at that. We'll be driving back today, but tomorrow we'll be working on getting all this stuff out to the email. You'll be receiving spreadsheets or the scoring sheet, basically. One thing I would encourage all members to do is remember that if you have questions or comments, put those in the comments section as well, or keep those, because you'll think of them as you're going through and as you're scoring. But you may not remember those when it comes to the June or July meeting or the hearings. So writing them down is going to be really important for your own memory. Also, other members will get a chance to see those comments, and that's really important too, because it jogs other questions and get thoughts. So please remember that too.
And I would add that the comments that you put down, everyone who's been around knows I put a lot of comments down, but the proposers get to see. And there are proposals that we see where the proposer has missed something and they don't know it until we point that out to them. Or they've left something out that they shouldn't have, or they've added something that doesn't make sense. So it's very helpful for the proposers. It's helpful for the rest of the members, and it's great for us when we get to the hearings to know what it was you were thinking when you read the proposal 2 months before that you wanted to ask about and get clarification of, so you better understand the project. So use the comments extensively if you're willing. Are there any other questions about the process?
Can I just ask about the dates? When do we need them?
When is the scoring due?
Mr. Chair and members, July 15th.
July 15th. So enjoy 4th of July weekend. Yeah, we need them in because we've got to be able to get them all for our July 30th meeting, which is where we'll do all of it and decide which proposal we want to hear. So staff will be bugging you on the 14th if you have not submitted, and you will have a very long night. Yeah, if there are questions, by all means, contact staff. You can certainly contact the proposer and say, I don't get it, or, you know, I need more information. That's every one of us will do this a little differently. But the idea is to come to a consensus in the end where we're feeling like we're comfortable and you know where we're headed.
I was unaware that we could read directly out.
There's nothing that prohibits you from doing that. I tend not to. Just as I tend not to go out and look at a project that's proposed, because I fall in love with it, and then it's unfair to everybody else. But we all have to decide how we're going to do that ourselves. But yeah, I read them all, I put the comments, and then I wait for stuff to come back instead of going out and calling everybody, asking what others have done. You have to decide what feels fair.
And I would just say to the new members, like when I'm doing the scoring, I put a lot of time in and it's stressful, but yet in the end, probably we're going to hear all these proposals. It's very rare that we don't hear them. And that's the point, is one, to read it like David said, but also if it's not appropriate for us to hear it. Otherwise, if it is appropriate, then even if it's maybe not one that you love, if it fits, you might, when we actually have a hearing, you might learn that you do love it or it's a good.
We have a hand up from Sandy.
Oh, I just want to remind, mostly for the new people, about the conflict of interest form that's also included, and that will get returned with your evaluations. And in addition, if you feel when you're reviewing a project that you do have a conflict with one of them, in the column where you would rate it, you just put COI, and that program will not be penalized on the averaging because you have a conflict and we're unable to vote. And I just wanted to remind the new, more for the new people about that.
Yeah, thank you, Sandy. Yeah, some of us serve on boards of organizations that have applied for money, and we obviously can't weigh in on that. I don't know what the proposals that are in now, so I don't know if I have conflicts, but we declare them and we avoid the discussion on them because it's not there.
In that case, you don't score that at all.
You don't score it at all.
COI.
The COI, we do a blended average and think there's a mathematical way to make sure you're not penalizing someone by declaring a conflict.
Questions on conflicts? Oh,
Yeah, if there are questions on conflicts, staff is more than willing to help. Any other questions? If not, we'll certainly get your spreadsheets and the binders, if you ask for a binder, and we can have a great 4th of July weekend. So it's really interesting to see what everyone proposes. One of the other things that's in there for new people is people who are asking for continuation of programs. We look at how much money they've already spent. How much do they have outstanding? Which gets to how much need versus how much desired. And with the kind of the number of proposals and the amount being requested, that will be even more important question for us, I suspect.
Some of the other groups that do what we do, part of the application is a previous funding history.
That's
part of
it, yes.
So we can see that.
Yep.
1999, which goes to be true, they got $1 million.
Mr. Chair and members, you'll see the the budgetary numbers in there, but if you want to see like the actual accomplishment plans or proposals, you can contact us and get you those.
Yeah. Any questions, call your staff.
Yeah.
They will figure out how to get you better information or get you less confused. All right. Great. I didn't have any requests for public comments. Any last thoughts? All right. I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for coming up and spending 2 days.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. I put it.